Hello and welcome to this special edition of the Picturehub Show. Today we have a business consultant, Natsai.
Thanks, Costa, and thank you for having me on your show. So, as Costa has already said, I'm Natsai Mawoni, and I am a business consultant. My journey has been quite interesting. My background is actually in chemical technology, and that's basically what I studied at Midland State University.
So is that like you're a scientist?
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay.
I'm a scientist. So after school, after college, I was faced with a situation like many other young graduates out of college where they necessarily couldn't get employment in their trade. And I stumbled upon an opportunity to work with a company that was based in the UK and in Zimbabwe.
Okay.
And I was a grant consultant for the business. So I basically trained and worked as a grant consultant for European SMEs.
So did you go to UK or this was here?
No, this was here.
Oh, okay.
Yes. The story of how I got to be there is quite long, so we'll save it for another day. But basically, my exposure in that area was to European SMEs that were developing groundbreaking technologies, and they were seeking funding from an EU fund that had been set up at the time called the FP7 Framework Program. And that was set up to, at the time, Europe was saying in terms of technology and business, they were lagging behind when compared to the US and when compared to Asia. So these companies would come together to form a consortium to develop a technology that was relevant to solutions for Europe. So I basically wrote grant proposals, which was preparing the whole business proposal for the consortium, and also analyzing the different SMEs to see if they were a good fit for what they were trying to do. And in the process, I got to conduct research on robotics, plastics technology, IT platforms.
Sounds like a very interesting job.
Yes, it was. It exposed me to a lot of technologies that I hadn't necessarily worked with, and also to how the first world was doing business, and also gave me a skill in that I then became a business writer because you had to do the whole proposal, right down to the market analysis and everything else. And for African clients, we wrote proposals for another fund, which was set up for African entrepreneurs.
And this was within the same
business, yes.
Okay.
And that was the Africa Entrepreneurial Challenge Fund, but that was more for development projects with a social impact angle, mainly in agribusiness, but not limited to agribusiness. Also WASH initiatives, which are water, sanitation and hygiene initiatives. So I can say that's where I developed my passion for business, but mainly for African business. It's just something that resonated with me, and I really just felt this stirring to probably develop my country and my continent to where we could also be talking about, these technologies that other countries were developing. But moving on after that, you know how it is, your parents want to see where their money went. So yes, I then left that arena and went to actually get more practical experience within my trade. And I landed up in the paint manufacturing industry. And my first role was at Astra Paints, where I was their resident paint chemist at the Harare factory. And that involved overseeing all quality assurance operations. I had a team that I oversaw in the lab, so I was training and working for Astra Paints. And I also came to enjoy that profession. And over the years, I then I moved on to Dulux, Zimbabwe, and I became the technical officer of the business. But during my time there, I hadn't actually stopped consulting. This was now mainly for local businesses because of people who knew what I used to do before.
So you had stopped work with the NGO, but you continued consulting?
Yes, I did. Okay. So this was always my side hustle and I guess my passion project. And it also lent me skills within my area in that I didn't put myself in a box and see myself as just a technical person. So not long after I joined Dulux, I then actually became the technical and production executive of the company. And this was the first position of its kind, I believe, for the company. And I had noticed it, but I then began to notice more acutely and become more aware of the fact that there weren't many women in STEM professions who were actually advancing to that level. And at this stage, actually even...
And how old were you? Because you look very young, so...
Oh, thank you. That was in 2015, so now I'm going to tell everybody my age.
Okay. Let's just say you were younger.
I was 31. I don't mind. I don't mind saying I was 31, and then another, I think, part of my personal development and career progression. Another aspect of it was born, which was that I saw a space to motivate women in STEM professions, that's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics professions, to actually work with the end goal in mind, to mentor them in that respect, and to have them become more marketable for positions that are not traditionally or conventionally for women in those fields, and also for individuals in STEM careers. You don't often find them being the executives in a business, even if it's a manufacturing business. So that's when that started. I'll maybe chat about that a bit later. And I worked with Dulux for 4 years, and then I was headhunted by a paint and manufacturing company in Ghana, who were doing something very innovative with paint, which was they were actually manufacturing paint for disease vector control. Wow. In layman's terms, that's they were manufacturing paint that kills insects that cause tropical diseases. So like
that
malaria.
means if you've got that paint, there's no roaches.
Exactly. Roaches, mosquitoes, flies.
Wow.
All that. It's called Ines Fly Africa, and their story is also quite interesting because the technology they're using is patented, and it was discovered by a female chemist. So obviously that spoke to me.
And was that like an African female?
No, it was a Spanish female.
Oh, okay.
But the first ever manufacturing plant was set up in Ghana.
Wow.
And I assumed a position there as the technical director of the business. So, you know, my career progression has basically exposed me to the business strategy side of business, manufacturing operations, and inevitably I got to learn how the entirety of the organization works, because whatever you do in the technical and manufacturing operations side of things has to align with, you know, the overall strategy of the business and the marketing strategy. And so that's where I found myself. In the process, because as I already mentioned earlier, I am passionate about the advancement of women in STEM. I became a Tech Women Fellow in 2018. Tech Women is basically a US State Department sponsored initiative for what they call emerging female leaders. So
did these guys look for you, or you?
No, you apply.
You apply,
yes,
okay.
You apply. So it's They select from applications of who they regard emerging female leaders. That's women in STEM professions who they also think are entrepreneurial or who are doing something with a social impact in their communities. And for me at that stage, my social impact initiative was my own trust that I founded. It's called the Pink Butterfly Trust. And our tagline is freedom for girls through health and education. And we'd like to facilitate for girls to stay in school, basically. So I joined the Tech Women program. There were 5 women from Zimbabwe who were chosen from each country. It's 4 women from Africa, Central Asia, and the Middle East. It was a very pivotal point in my career and in my life. And at the time I was working away from my family, that's one thing. And we were sort of considering our options, and at the same time, I just wanted to do more. I wanted to do more with my skills, with my trade, and I felt I had reached a level where I could actually try it out. So, you know, as I was deciding what was next after the program, I actually decided that I was actually going to leave permanent employment and become a business consultant full-time. I saw a gap in manufacturing, in agro-processing, where companies could derive more value and more growth from their products and services. I especially am passionate about also creating what we call circular economies, which is them harnessing products that are already in the cycle, a form of recycling, to derive more value. And at the same time, I'm a chemical formulation specialist, and I do that for a lot of cosmetics. There are a lot of small-time cosmetics companies coming up, and a lot of them want to be organic, they want to be greener. And that's something that also speaks to me. So I give them ways to do that. And after I left Tech Women, I was also invited to be a speaker at this Interior Exchange. It's a business conference for global leaders from different spheres. And I was a speaker there, and I chronicled my journey in science and in business. And I also showcased the company I was working for at the time, which was Inhouse Africa. So all these were just indicators that I could probably make a success of this thing. So that's what led me to where I am now. And currently I have a client base in Ghana in agribusiness, and I have a wide client portfolio here in Zimbabwe. It's manufacturing businesses, and also businesses that are not traditionally ones that I've worked in, but who want to innovate their processes and who are looking to the future. I've branded myself a humanitarian and Afropreneur, which basically means I'm passionate about women's advancement and about African entrepreneurship, and about creating synergies within or for African businesses that will create African solutions that best serve our markets and empower our people. Yeah.
Wow.
So that's me in a nutshell.
That's more of a nut bag, a bag of nuts.
It's a very big nut. But yeah.
As a business consultant, I think we've been reading or listening to the news rather,
Yes.
And we have this virus that's affecting people. I mean, infecting people and affecting them as well. I mean, as from a business consultant's point of view, like what do you make of what's going on?
Okay. So, what do I make of what's going on? That's a very loaded question. But looking at, firstly, the global perspective, obviously it goes without saying that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a massive impact on business, especially for China, where it originated. One of the things that stand out for me is that the global supply chain has been disrupted. And also that in terms of industries like tourism, they obviously have felt the first aftershock of this, with restricted travel, with people also self-quarantining, and in terms of the ripple effects, even on us, on African business. If I'm to take our situation in Zimbabwe, we rely heavily on imports. We rely heavily on imports from South Africa, first of all, and then China, and a host of other countries. And while it seemingly at the moment, it may not have had an effect on the larger, sort of organizations, because they obviously plan for their manufacture months in advance. I'm sure we anticipate that in the coming weeks, in the coming months, we are going to start feeling that clogging up of the system, with ports being closed, and also with China recovering and getting back. I think from the statistics I've read that a lot of businesses are now back opening up in China and operational. And also at the same time, even shipping and the logistics of things is that, for instance, I know with some local companies, their shipping companies have increased the tariff on the shipping by about 35%.
Why? Is this because now they have to implement procedures to check?
Yes, it's procedures, and I think a portion of that is also saying we are absorbing the risk.
Oh,
yes.
okay.
And there are other companies that have had to activate alternative supply chains, which obviously does affect their margins and their revenues, because the cost will differ from the prices they're getting from the Chinese markets. There's also smaller shipping companies that still have opted to get goods out of China, but the process for that is quite complicated. So you can imagine the implications for business from that perspective. And then in terms of other corporates, there are a lot of considerations for employees to work from home, to work remotely, and a lot of countries may not necessarily have that capacity. I'm sure we are quite a long way from being able to do that fully, to work from home remotely. And then with your traditional SME, people are staying home more, people are being more cautious about what they're buying. And the effects are, and also the beauty industry, for instance, it's a contact sort of industry. If I go for a massage, then obviously there's contact, and just being in someone's space. And
so I guess for businesses like that, it literally means there's no business.
I think it does. I think if we're taking it seriously and if we want to protect our health and everybody else's, we just have to look at it that way.
Coming back to the massage, I still have rent to pay.
Yes.
Do I let my employees go? What happens?
I think the questions you've raised allow us to take pause and think. When we think in terms of our small businesses, should we just think, oh, this thing is running and it's running? We have to think in terms of the future and what can happen. And I think this is going to have to be a learning for a lot of small, even for the larger corporates. There are a lot of learnings that we're going to gain from this. And one, probably when you're asking about a beauty parlor, for instance, and I'm going to run with that example, I think the only way, there may be potentially a way for somebody to continue to operate, is house calls. And that's because it's something you agree on individually with the client, and you agree on the measures that you're going to take to be safe. And not a situation where someone is coming to the beauty parlor, there are other people coming and everyone is exposed. If somebody thinks, oh yeah, I still need my manicures, I still need my massages, I still need to get my hair done, then house calls may be it at this point. I'm sure people are going to be reluctant to let people into their space, considering you don't necessarily know when somebody is infected or not. But I think it's a good option, considering that we have the guidelines from the medical fraternity and from WHO on how we should take care of ourselves in this season. And then there's the other side where there are people who just sell goods. And on goods, I think there's still a gap or an ability to try deliveries and try and make those deliveries no contact, or stick to the precepts of social distancing, which we've been advised to do, the 1 meter, the 1.5 meters. But there are options around delivery which work great. And it would also work for via drivers or taxi drivers who still need business but aren't necessarily getting a lot of fares because people are staying home, people are not going out, entertainment, all those things. So they could actually, and I must say, it's also an opportunity for people to network and collaborate more. This is how businesses are going to work, and especially in the future. This is why companies elsewhere in the world buy other companies, because they're doing something better or well that they can actually work together on. So, that.
So now when you say, maybe if you could give examples, we're talking about people self-quarantining and not being out more, but at the same time you're talking about networking and collaborating. How does that then work?
Okay. So that then brings us to another glaring issue, which is businesses going digital or having some level of online presence. And that doesn't necessarily look like a flashy website and posting every day.
Yes.
We have WhatsApp platforms, and the great thing about Zim is WhatsApp is actually widely used in business, in everything else, because you'll find that when you go to other countries, some people actually find it strange that you talk to somebody, you discuss business on WhatsApp. But we've managed to use that mode of communication to our advantage.
Yes.
And that's something people can look at. They can look at, there are all sorts of groups these days. You find hairdresser groups, you find groups for anything and everything. And that's a start. That's already networking. It doesn't have to be something very elaborate. That's what people can do. And at the same time, they should either establish an online presence or maintain one if they have one already, and even be more intentional about their digital marketing, about their online presence, about their messaging at this time. And that's something businesses can actually look at doing. Yes.
That's interesting. And in terms of, I know you worked in Ghana for a bit. Are there any differences or lessons that we can pick from other African nations that we could start implementing, considering, say, I mean, this thing is going to come and go eventually, but moving forward, we then would need to learn a few things that if something like this were to happen again, I wouldn't want to be in the same position.
So we've already talked about going digital. We've talked about one of the biggest things actually in West Africa that I noticed upon arriving there was that practically every company had a delivery option.
Okay.
So that's something I think we should think about in terms of convenience, in terms of ease of transaction, because customers, everybody's using EcoCash and bank transfers anyway. So it's just a matter of being intentional about linking those platforms and also about streamlining deliveries. And it's a gap for companies that can do the deliveries locally and individuals as well, depending on how you look at it. A lot of them used bikes, not depending on the goods obviously, but a lot of them used bikes, which is something we can also implement here. It's a quick and effective way of getting.
And I don't think it's as costly, depending on the size as well.
No, it's not. It's exactly. So I think that's the whole point of that. And another thing is maybe not necessarily from Ghana, but just from observing what companies are doing right now in this season and in this space. And the obvious thing is, if you can, join the fight. And a great example is L'Oreal, who are a cosmetics company, have started making hand sanitizer and hydroalcoholic gels for distribution. Companies that make soaps and detergents locally can actually do that. We've already seen hand sanitizer running out. I was in Pick n Pay just the day before yesterday, and they didn't have hand sanitizer. And the thing is, besides having their revenues in mind, and also considering that there is going to be some way they're losing business, that's another thing to do to manage this crisis. And also, I think this is from a book I'm reading currently, which is actually written by one of the co-founders of LinkedIn. And it talks about ABZ planning as an individual and as an organization. That you have your plan A, which is what you're doing now currently. But within your plan A, you must have built-in systems and mechanisms to iterate or to adapt quickly to a crisis or a situation in the market or a change in consumer behavior. And your plan B is then what that plan A evolved into. So for instance, maybe your company started off making cosmetics and this crisis happened and you started making hand sanitizer. Then maybe you looked at going into other hygiene products. Maybe companies then become more conscious of disinfecting their workspaces and cleaning on a more regular basis, which I'm sure is bound to happen. And right now, companies have started those internal drives because we've appreciated that not everybody can work from home, but we are doing what we can to confine ourselves and protect our employees within the space. So they have started looking at those solutions to actually say, okay, how often are we going to disinfect? What are we doing in the workspaces besides just giving employees hand sanitizer? And then your plan Z is your fallback plan. What works, what has always worked, and what you fall back on if all else fails. Yes, your original product line. But I think what that illustrates is we must be able to adapt and also to pivot.
And I think what I like from what you've just said is when it's not a thing where you're waiting on government to do something.
Exactly.
Because I think it's very important that we all play our part and find the things that we can do to contribute, because this is something that can affect you and your family, you know, and no one is like really immune. You know, before they were saying no young people are immune. This morning I was watching a report about teenagers dying, you know, in China and Italy, you know, and it doesn't really discriminate. You've seen leaders in Iran, you know, being affected. So I think it's very important for us to not always just say government must solve. Yes, there might be some shortcomings, but there's something that I can do, you know. And I'm sure it could be even a potential business line.
Exactly.
I'm sure legislation will change at some point.
Exactly. I think it's key, and it's really the logical thing that a lot of businesses should be doing. There are WHO-approved formulas and recipes online for everybody to use, for hand rub, for hand sanitizer, and also for the disinfecting products. I can give you those links to add to the description box. And at the same time, this is the time for private sector to show up. And without sounding charlatan about it, people are going to remember you for that. They're going to remember your brand. They're going to identify that your brand with that. So if there are any corporates listening, they should probably consider that route, whether they do it by monetary contribution or it's an actual manufacturing enterprise. They're quite capable of setting this in motion. And even for individuals, I guess they should be aware of places where they can get raw materials to make their own sanitizers at home. And I'll also include that in the links that I'll share with you in the description box. And probably the last thing is, I think a practice that a lot of businesses have adopted is that if there is a lull in business for whatever reason, then how can we make our workforce more effective? You know, let's look at what training we can do in that season, or let's move something from the end of the year or another period in the year when we're going to do it. That's more of an internal exercise like strategy, retreats or meetings, and we can find lots of creative ways of doing that online if everybody can't be in the same place. And also there are a lot of free online courses that young people, everybody, business people can take to also keep themselves occupied and to give their team something. And actually, one of them is LinkedIn, which traditionally charges for their online courses, has unlocked about 16 different courses for people to actually just go on there and do them. And I've got 2 other links to websites with an actual course with a certificate at the end. And people downplay those online courses. But one thing we need to realize, again, is we are in such a fast evolving environment. Sometimes you're not going to go back and do a whole master's or a whole tertiary qualification to give you the capacity to do what you need to do or what you want to do. We have aptitude to learn something and implement it in the context of our business, in the context of what we are doing. And some of those courses are also just for personal development. You know, how to be an effective leader, or they're about civic engagement or something that you just want to learn about. So I would encourage people to actually go online and look at those courses. And even for the guy who doesn't know where to even start with a website or with digital marketing, it's all there. And that's what they could be doing in this season, or even learn more about how to be more effective, your posts, how to, get people to go on your pages and all that. So those are all things we could be doing during this time to actually weather the storm, but also still be productive and gear for the future, prepare for the future with tools like these. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And that brings us to the end of this episode. I think it's very important for us to be empathetic in this time period where a lot of people are going through suffering. You might not be infected, but we are all affected, and it's very important for us to open our hearts and, if it comes to it, open our wallets and our business to be able to contribute and to assist others. And with that, I say stay clean and stay healthy.
Thank you.